When I arrived at my sister's engagement party, the security guard sent me to the service entrance. She had absolutely no idea that I owned the estate, or that the groom's family was about to learn that fact the hard way. The guard sneered at my faded gray hoodie and pointed a thick finger toward the loading dock. "Staff goes that way," she muttered, her eyes scanning my worn sneakers with obvious disgust. I kept my mouth shut, turned on my heel, and took the back alley. Let them think I was just another underpaid server hauled in for the dinner rush. My silence was a choice. At 32 years old, I had built a hospitality empire from nothing but calloused hands and 20-hour shifts. 10 years ago, I was scrubbing toilets in a 2-star motel on the wrong side of town, pocketing loose change just to keep the heat on in my apartment. Tonight, I owned the crystal chandeliers hanging above our heads. I owned the marble floors they walked on, the imported silk napkins on their tables, and the very air they breathed inside this property. But Selena Brooks, my sister's future mother-in-law, was a walking illusion. I knew the truth about her. I had seen her financial background check when her assistant tried to book this venue months ago. I knew exactly how close the Brooks family was to absolute ruin. Their so-called generational wealth was completely hollow, propped up by maxed-out credit lines and overdue mortgages. Yet there she was, parading around my property, sipping vintage champagne she could not actually afford, acting like a queen holding court. My younger sister, Violet, sat next to her, stiff as a board. Violet wore a white silk dress that cost her 3 months of hard-earned savings. She wanted so badly to be accepted by these people. For the past 2 years, I had watched Violet bend over backward, silencing her own voice, hiding her modest background, and letting them chip away at her pride just for a seat at their crumbling table. Through the kitchen's swinging porthole window, the ballroom looked like a crystal-plated fantasy. Right in the middle stood Selena, shoving my parents' name cards onto a wobbly table pushed directly against the noisy kitchen doors. Every time a waiter rushed out with a heavy tray, the wooden doors would bang against the backs of those chairs. Violet flinched. She stepped forward, her hands shaking as she questioned the seating arrangement. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Selena smiled a perfectly painted smile and patted Violet on the cheek. "Violet, darling," she purred, her tone dripping with fake pity. "I seated your family there out of kindness. Your parents are used to the smell of grease from cheap diners. Seating them near my elite guests would just overwhelm them. They would not know which fork to use. And it would just be terribly humiliating for everyone. You should be thanking me for hiding your cheap upbringing." Violet swallowed hard. Her shoulders sank in complete defeat. She looked down at the floor, accepting the venom as if she deserved it. From the shadows of the prep line, my fingernails dug so deeply into my palms they almost broke the skin. Selena sneered at our cheap upbringing, completely unaware that this very cheapness built the 7-figure estate she was currently standing in. She believed she possessed the upper hand. She believed wealth was a weapon to crush the vulnerable. I watched her parade around my ballroom, deciding right then to let her dig her grave just a little bit deeper. I grabbed a black catering vest from the break room. I hoisted a heavy silver tray of red wine onto my shoulder. I needed to get close. I needed to hear the poison they were pouring into my sister's ear, to measure exactly how far this delusion reached. I approached the head table. Selena stood beside Violet, whispering to a group of society women draped in diamonds. They were laughing, a cruel, sharp sound that cut through the jazz music. Selena's eyes flicked toward me. Just a quick, dismissive glance at a nameless servant in a black vest. But in that split second, the corner of her mouth twitched. She recognized a target. She shifted her weight. Her sharp velvet heel shot out, hooking directly around my ankle. The world tilted. I twisted my body, desperately pulling the heavy tray backward, fighting gravity to save the glass. The momentum dragged me down. My knees slammed into the marble floor. Glass shattered. 3 goblets of vintage Merlot launched into the air and crashed directly onto Violet. The dark red liquid soaked into her pristine white silk like fresh blood. The heavy stain bloomed across her lap, ruining the dress in seconds. The jazz band stopped playing. The room went dead silent. Before the final piece of glass even settled, Selena gasped. A loud, theatrical shriek engineered to draw every single eyeball in the room. "Are you completely incompetent?" she barked at me, treating me like dirt scraped off her shoe. Then, she pivoted, turning the full force of her venom directly onto Violet. "My God. Violet, are you really this clumsy and vulgar?" Selena shouted. Her voice bounced off the vaulted ceilings, sharp and unforgiving. Violet trembled. Her hands hovered uselessly over the ruined silk. Her breath hitched in her throat. She looked around, realizing 300 wealthy strangers were staring at her with pity and disgust. "I told you," Selena sneered, projecting her voice so the elite guests in the back row could hear every word. "Peasant blood always reeks of cheap rags, no matter how much designer fabric you drape over it. You simply do not belong here. You bring the stench of the gutter right to our dinner table," the guests whispered. Some pointed. Violet's face drained of color. She stood completely paralyzed, shrinking under the weight of massive, public humiliation. My sister broke right in front of me. The light left her eyes as the crowd judged her for a crime she did not commit. Selena stood tall, chest puffed out, feeding on my sister's misery like a starving parasite. She thought she was untouchable. She had absolutely no idea she had just declared war on the one person in this room who held the detonator to her entire life. The silver tray clattered against the marble floor. I abandoned the remaining glasses and lunged forward, placing my body firmly between Violet and her tormentor. Before I could even open my mouth, a heavy hand clamped onto my shoulder. Alan, the groom's younger brother, ripped me backward. He shoved me with everything he had. My collarbone slammed against the sharp edge of a mahogany serving table. A jolt of white-hot pain shot down my spine. The room spun, the edges of my vision blurring, but I locked my knees and gripped the wood to stay on my feet. "Who are you glaring at?" Servant Alan snarled, stepping into my personal space. The smell of stale whiskey and expensive cologne rolled off his breath. "Get down on the floor and wipe my mother's shoes right now, or I will smash your face in." Violet choked on a terrified sob. She whipped her head around, her tear-filled eyes locking onto Jeremy. He was her fiancé, the man who promised to protect her against the world, the man who swore he was different from the rest of his toxic, arrogant family. Jeremy stepped forward. He reached out, wrapped his fingers tightly around Violet's wrist, and pulled her back. "Just endure it, Violet," Jeremy whispered, his tone desperate and cowardly. His voice carried just enough over the quiet crowd for me to catch every drop of poison in his words. "She just slipped. It is our big day. Please do not embarrass my mother." The ultimate betrayal. Instead of offering a shield, he served her up as a sacrifice. An enabler will always feed you to the wolves to save their own skin. Jeremy prioritized his mother's fragile, twisted ego over his future wife's physical safety and basic human dignity. Violet stared at him, her mouth slightly open. The last spark of light died in her eyes. She shrank into herself, pulling her arms tight across her chest, entirely defeated by the man she loved. My blood boiled. A younger me would have smashed a champagne bottle and dragged my sister out of that toxic room. They broke me when I was 19, crying over a wealthy customer's insults. But today, I held the hammer. Explosive rage is a cheap weapon. Cold calculation is lethal. Throwing a punch wouldn't save Violet. Exposing their rotting core would. I needed to give Selena enough rope to hang herself. I needed a crime. Playing the terrified waitress. I unbuttoned my black catering vest. Inside the pocket sat a thick white envelope, bulging with paper designed to look like $2,000 in cash. Right next to it, the brass master keys to the estate dangled openly. I draped the vest over an empty chair, barely 2 feet from Selena's designer purse. It looked careless, a rushed servant abandoning her post in shame. I retreated into the shadows behind the heavy velvet drapes. I watched the head table. Narcissists cannot resist an easy target. Selena thought she had just conquered the room, her ego bloated and starving for another victory. The trap was set. My eyes tracked Selena's every move. Her gaze locked onto the white envelope. Her fingers twitched. For all her talk of elite breeding, she had the hollow desperation of a starving scavenger. Her legacy was built on quicksand. The jazz band resumed. Violet remained frozen, wiping her stained dress. The crowd's attention drifted. Selena checked her surroundings with a quick, predatory scan. She slipped a gaudy diamond ring off her finger, hiding it in her palm. With a smooth glide, she stepped over to the chair and dropped the heavy stone directly into my pocket. The trap snapped shut. Her toxic greed drove her right into the snare. She thought she was framing a helpless servant, but she was laying the foundation for a felony extortion charge. I didn't rush out. I walked down the hallway into the central security office. The head of my security team sat at the monitors next to the local police captain, who I'd hired dozens of times. I pointed at the screen. We watched the playback. 10 minutes passed. The music cut off with an ear-piercing screech. Selena stood on the dance floor, gripping a microphone. "Lock the doors!" she shrieked. "Security! Lock them right now, I have been robbed!" A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Selena marched straight toward my abandoned vest. She plunged her hand inside, yanking out the glittering ring and holding it high like a trophy. She spotted me walking back in and pointed a manicured finger straight at my chest. "Your family is a pack of thieving rats." Selena spat, storming toward Violet. She slammed her hand on the table. "This is a $50,000 heirloom. Your trashy sister just tried to steal my family's legacy." Violet sobbed, backing away until her chair hit the doors. Trapped. Selena unlatched her purse, pulled out a thick stack of legal papers, and slammed a pen on top. "You will sign this total asset surrender prenuptial agreement right this second," Selena demanded. "Every single penny, every marital right, signed away immediately as compensation for this gross violation. Sign it, or I will have this ghetto staff arrested. I will drag your family's pathetic name through the mud on the front page of every paper in this city." Violet turned to Jeremy, grasping his tuxedo jacket for a lifeline. He just stared at his shoes and took a slow step backward, leaving her completely alone. Selena waved at the security guards. "Call the police!" she barked. "Do not let the trash escape." I walked straight past the security guards. They stepped aside. I marched up to the head table, flanked by the police captain and 2 armed officers. "The police are already here." "Selena," I said. My voice rolled over the silent crowd. Selena scoffed, thrusting the ring at the captain. "Arrest her," she ordered. "She stole my property." I orchestrated a much quieter, far more lethal humiliation. I handed a black tablet to the police captain. He pressed play. Selena, Alan, and Jeremy watched the crystal-clear security footage of Selena taking off her own ring and stuffing it into my coat. Selena's jaw dropped. The arrogant fire in her eyes extinguished. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a stack of envelopes, and handed them to the most prominent society figures at the table. "I suggest you read those before you associate your names with the Brooks family any longer." I said softly. They ripped the envelopes open. Inside were copies of the $150,000 check Selena used to pay for the venue, stamped in red insufficient funds. Right behind it lay 3 foreclosure notices for the Brooks family properties. Gossip ignited instantly. The wealthy guests recoiled, sliding their chairs away from Selena as if poverty were contagious. "Let me properly introduce myself," I said, looking directly into Selena's terrified eyes. "I am Beatrix. I own this estate. You called us peasants. At least we do not have to fake a robbery to extort a 25-year-old girl just to pay our overdue mortgages." All the blood drained from Selena's face. Alan, the violent bully, shrank backward, eyes darting frantically toward the exits. Violet finally woke up. The terror vanished. She stood up straight and marched over to Jeremy. He reached out in panic. "Violet, please," Jeremy begged, his voice cracking. "I did not know we can fix this." Violet stared at him with pure revulsion. She slid her engagement ring off her finger and threw it directly at his chest. "You did not know," Violet yelled. "Or you just did not care. We are done." The police captain stepped forward, pulling out handcuffs. "Selena Brooks," he said, "you are under arrest for attempted grand theft by extortion and filing a false police report." The officers grabbed Selena. She shrieked and kicked, but they locked the steel around her wrists. A second officer grabbed Alan for the physical assault on my shoulder. The elite crowd watched in dead silence as the Brooks family was marched out in utter disgrace. 8 months later, the gavel slammed in the county courtroom. Selena stood before the judge in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, her dyed blonde hair showing harsh gray roots. The judge read the sentence with absolute disgust. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison, plus a mandatory restitution payment of $150,000. Alan pleaded guilty to criminal battery. The judge handed him 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and anger management therapy, permanently destroying his corporate career. Legal justice hit hard, but the social execution wiped them off the map. The Charlotte Elite Country Club revoked their membership, and society ladies blacklisted them overnight. The bank auctioned off their foreclosed properties. Everything they built on lies crumbled into dust. Months passed. A thin white envelope arrived for Violet. It was from Jeremy. She sat at my kitchen island and unfolded the cheap paper. The words dripped with manipulation. He blamed his mother, played the victim, and begged for a coffee date to rebuild their future. He thought he could pull the same old strings. Violet read the page in total silence. She folded the letter, dropped it into the garbage disposal, and flipped the switch. The metal blades ground it into pulp. She blocked his number and smiled at me. The chains of the past were shattered. Our lives look entirely different now. Violet moved into my guest house and took over the floral design department for my event company, turning her passion into a 6-figure business. She thrives, completely free from trying to please unpleasable people. Every Sunday, we host dinner on the patio. We don't invite fake socialites. We invite our chosen family, the catering staff, our close friends, the people who stood by us when we had nothing. The peace we found is unbreakable because we built it on truth, not a hollow facade. I see so many people trapped in the same nightmare. You sit across from toxic in-laws or manipulative partners, biting your tongue, hoping your silence will buy their respect. You tell yourself if you just endure a bit more, they will see your worth. Here is the truth about narcissists. They don't hoard money, they hoard status. They use cruelty as a smokescreen to hide their failures. If someone reminds you of their position by tearing you down, their empire is already rotting. They need your submission to feel powerful because they have no real power. And the enabler is always more dangerous than the abuser. An abuser attacks from the front. The enabler stabs you in the back. They tell you to endure the abuse, demanding you sacrifice your sanity to keep their world comfortable. They disguise their cowardice as keeping the peace. Write these 3 rules down. Rule number 1. True power is perfectly quiet. The loudest people in the room are usually the most desperate. Wealth shouts, but confidence whispers. Rule number 2. An enabler will always serve you up as a meat shield. Never marry a person who asks you to set yourself on fire to keep their family warm. If they won't defend you in minor battles, they will abandon you in major wars. Rule number 3. Dignity is not a currency you can trade for acceptance. Toxic people do not respect submission. They demand more of it until nothing of you remains. You deserve a seat where you are celebrated, not tolerated. Have you ever dealt with an enabler who told you to keep the peace while your life was being destroyed? How did you find the strength to walk away? Let me know in the comments. Share this with someone who needs the courage to leave a toxic table. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a long history, a last name, or an engagement ring. I am Beatrix, and I am free. Does this faster, punchier pacing align perfectly with the vision you have for the final video output?